See, and there's the little dude. There's the notification. So it's not like we're caught off guard. Hello, hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you especially to those of you who pre-registered for this event. We are very excited to be able to put it on. So we're going to have kind of two parts to this conversation. We're going to start with a little bit of a PowerPoint. I'm just going to talk really quickly about some legislative pieces, some statistics around our trans students in particular, and then we're going to get into it. We're going to have a conversation, and it might just be Finley and I. We did have a panel arranged for you all, but youth are back in school, and so their schedules are so hectic. So we'll just roll with it, and we'll see what happens. But for those of you who haven't joined us for one of our streams before, you haven't met me before or seen me on one of the many things that I've been on, my name is Evan Johnson. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am the Community and Youth Programming Manager for TransFamily Support Services, and I'm very excited to be able to bring this information. I've been working with our youth for about 5 years now, primarily facilitating the high school support group, but I work with all of our age ranges of young adults and youth, as well as do a bunch of trainings for schools. TransFamily is really happy that we're able to say that we have MOUs with 3 school districts now in the San Diego area, and that's a big deal, right? So we are available as a resource. I'm going to be plugging us a couple of times in this conversation as I'm sure it becomes relevant. But yeah, just thank y'all for joining us. And if my team could pull up my PowerPoint, I won't be able to see comments and everything while it is up because I am not good at technology and I don't have 2 monitors, which I'm learning I'm going to need to get to continue to be the professional that I am. But here are my slides, right? So we're just going to blast through these really quickly. So first of all, let's talk about culture. When we talk about the LGBTQ community, and in particular for our youth, we're talking about an ever-changing culture that they are experiencing in a way completely unique to them. So, you know, when we'll be sharing a little bit later, I'll talk from my own experiences. I'm now a graduate college student, and so it's been a little bit since I've been in high school, and the world has already changed quite a bit since I graduated high school. So it's important that we're mindful of how quickly this community is changing and evolving, and how our allyship needs to continue to put our youth at the front of it so that we can continue to support them in the best way possible. So just some statistics about our trans youth. The Trevor Project puts out a national survey on LGBTQ youth every year. This is from the 2020 study. And there's some really disparaging statistics that we're seeing in regards to things like conversion therapy being advocated for in schools or being promoted in schools. 6 out of 10 LGBTQ youth said that someone tried to convince them to change their sexual orientation or gender identity, specifically in school. 1 out of 3 LGBTQ youth have been physically threatened or harmed, 40% of our trans youth as opposed to 30% of our LGB youth. And then only 1 in 5 trans and non-binary youth are reporting having their pronouns respected by most people in their life. And these are nationwide statistics. You can look up the rest of this study. They put a beautiful little infographic that splits it into a very legible web format on the Trevor Project's website if you look for their national survey on LGBTQ youth in 2020. And then this last statistic, this is from the California Healthy Kids Survey. This statistic was taken in 2017, I believe. We haven't seen a lot of change in it since that 2017 piece, but this is specific to California, right? And 52% of trans students in California have considered suicide compared to just 16% of our non-trans students. That's a pretty heavy statistic to start this conversation off, and I promise I'm going somewhere with this, but I want to sit on it for a second because we're going to talk about laws and legislations with that California lens because we are primarily in San Diego, and California is kind of one of the best models of what trans and LGBT affirming student legislation is going to look like. And yet we still see this 52%. So how do we bring this 52% down? Well, the Trevor Project, the same survey that put out the rest of those statistics, showed that one supportive adult in a trans or in an LGBTQ youth's life can cut that suicide attempt rate by 40%. And I bring this up especially with our teachers and with our educators, because while when we look at the statistic, while we may think, oh, one supportive adult in their household, one supportive adult who sees them every day, that's not what the statistics say. It is one supportive adult in their life. For myself, and I'll share a little bit about my own story. For myself, it was one teacher in my high school that I came out to before anyone else. And I didn't even take this teacher's class. I just hung out in his classroom because he had coffee in his back room. And I was like, all right, it's cold in the mornings. My sister has a 0 period, and so I have to be here an hour early. I'm going to hang out with this teacher. And he was the first teacher to ever have questions about my gender identity. that weren't judgmental. He one morning asked me, "Are you Mr. or Miss Johnson?" And when my answer was, "I don't know," he said, "Let's look it up together." And so he Googled it for me, and we figured out what the gender neutral honorific is. And that changed my whole perception of interacting with adults as a young trans person. This one teacher, and then the later teachers that I would come out to, and the way that they would support and affirm me, made it worth coming to school every day. It is really hard as a trans youth to put yourself in an environment where maybe your peers or other adults in that space may say disparaging things to you, but to have that one affirming adult can change your life. And obviously, when we look at this, it's really important that we look at this from a lens of intersectionality. In schools in particular, we should be looking at, excuse me, I had coffee and it's not sitting well. But we should be looking at, we've all had, diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings that have talked a lot about race and nation of origin and first language spoken at home. And obviously we need to be aware of those pieces, but other cultural pieces that our students are walking into our space with, things like religion that they were raised within, things like if they have disability or neurodiversity. We see high rates of intersectionality between students with autism and students who identify as gender diverse, and yet their stories so frequently are being disregarded because of their neurodiversity. And so we need to be mindful of how intersectionalities just enrich our youth's lives, and how we need to be affirming of all the aspects of their identities and not just push one to the side because of what another identity may be. I forgot that I'm pushing on my own buttons because I don't usually show the PowerPoint. So let's talk about some legal protections. Let's talk about throughout the country. There are, first of all, let me just say there are no nationwide protections for LGBTQ students. Most LGBTQ legislation exists primarily through state laws, and only 17 provide full protections for gender identity and expression. For our adults, there are still states where you can get married to a same-sex partner on the weekend and fired from your job on Monday. This is the reality that our youth are watching as well. And so we see students who are hesitant to come out because they know in their state there is a low policy protecting them in the working world, in the legal world. And so of course that's going to be reflected in their schools as well. And if you're in one of these states that in the past year has had a lot of anti-trans legislation, states like Arkansas, Alabama, or Texas, where they have passed a lot of this legislation, or they have had long ongoing battles about this legislation, know how much this is impacting your students. And beyond how it's impacting our students, we also know how it's impacting us as advocates of these students and conduits of these students. And knowing that it is going to get tiring and it is a battle, but know that your value and your worth as allies to this community are going to outweigh this disparaging statistic. We really want to lean into how much affirming school campuses can impact a youth. We see higher rates of overall discrimination, not just lower rates of overall discrimination, not just LGBTQ discrimination, but overall with students in schools that have access to GSAs or other like rainbow clubs or gender sexuality alliances. So we know that there is a positive impact of support of these sorts of communities. And then federally, I feel like we should always be talking about it. The Equality Act is out there. If you are in a state where your state legislators are not pushing for the Equality Act, I encourage you to mobilize yourself, and especially your coworkers or your peers or your family members. This is the only way that we can get federal protections for this community and for all marginalized identities. And this is really going to impact our students and their wellness at school. So knowing laws and best practices federally, we have FERPA, which is a privacy act, and Title IX, which is our Equal Access Act. And Title IX is interpreted state by state by the Board of Education in your state. Title IX is interpreted nationally, and the way that Title IX is interpreted is to include sex as gender, gender identity, and gender expression, perceived or actual. So being mindful that there is a lot wrapped into this one policy, and you just got to go digging for the right words. And those pieces that we're looking for are the gender identity and gender expression pieces. FERPA is what's going to protect our students when they disclose their identity to us as LGBTQ. We cannot share that information to anyone without their permission, and that includes parents. A lot of really well-meaning educators may want to call home and say, hey, you know, your kiddo told me, or maybe they slip up and they say in some form of communication to parents a kiddo's actual name instead of their dead name. And we need to be really careful in these interactions that we are following the lead of the student. And so if that means, hey, I really want to affirm and support you, who else knows what you just told me? And being able to have that conversation. In California, the Student Safety and Violence Prevention Act uh, says that schools must protect students who are LGBTQ or perceived as LGBTQ from harassment in schools. And then AB 1266, this is the one we talk about a lot in California. This is the one that allows our trans students in particular access to the locker room, sports teams, and other gendered spaces that is with their identified gender. And this is also what allows them access to changing their name and pronouns through the school system. In the state of California, our youth are able to change their names on all school documentation except for what's called like official school documentation. So that's things like state testing. So being able to advocate within your school district and advocate with your own administrators to make sure that these practices are being followed. And if you're in a state where this is not legislation, being able to advocate and say, look, we can look research-wise and we know that this is what best practice is for these youth. And so encouraging them to follow that lead. And then suggested communications, and my golly, I don't have a watch anymore, and so I am blasting through this because I really want to get to the actual talky bit, because that's what you all are actually interested in. No one wants to hear Evan go on another ramble about another PowerPoint, but being able to encourage our students to disclose with us. The biggest piece I will say, as especially teachers, if they're assuming there are teachers in attendance, because that's who we really marketed this towards, when you introduce yourself with your pronouns, you are innately creating a space where it's safe for your students to disclose things like actual name and pronouns. So being able to talk to them and say, like, on the first day of school, I had a teacher in high school who would give us all a note card, and any relevant information that we wanted her to know, we would put on that note card. And that included, she explicitly would say our name and our pronouns. And so I put my actual name and my pronouns, and I'm transgender, but I'm not out at home. And so this is my name at home. And that teacher never made a real call out about it, but she called me that name, and we were able to then have that sort of support and have that sort of relationship where I knew if something happened on campus, I could access her. And for those of you who work with, you know, elementary schools and our elementary students, we know that our elementary schoolers are also coming into this knowledge. And so these conversations are going to look different. There's going to be a lot of partnership with families if families are affirming because of how young these kiddos are. And so what I'd really encourage you is to reach out to our organization. And we do trainings for schools and school districts and all school staff. And it's really phenomenal. I like doing it a lot, and we get some really great feedback. So especially for our elementary schools where all of this is really like, we are not seeing 5 and 8 and 10-year-olds in the media who are showing trans narratives. So it's not becoming as normalized as quickly as trans young adults and trans teens are. So we are able to help guide you in your school through that conversation so that we all feel like we're more comfortable and we all are prepared. And then TransFamily Support Services, in partnership with a ton of LGBTQ serving orgs in the San Diego area on the LGBT Youth Community Leadership Council, we put out an LGBTQ plus youth standards of care. This is accessible on our website. It's also accessible on San Diego Pride's website. And this is going to answer a lot of questions that you may have. If it's something that people have asked about before in regards to sports teams, in regards to prom, overnight field trips, chances are there is an answer in this youth standards of care. And if there's not, please feel free to reach out to us. We have been doing this work for so many years. You are not the first person to ask questions, and you won't be the last. So hopefully our tech wizard, Martine, is going to stop my screen share. Hey, thanks, tech wizard. There's more people here. Hey, whack. Okay, great. So, excuse me, private chat. Hello. Hello, people. So I don't know when people hopped on. Hold on, I'm looking at things. Great. All right, so we're gonna have a conversation, right? and specifically about what does allyship look like in our schools, in particular from our teachers. I actually just attended an event earlier this evening, which was about sports and LGBTQ inclusion in schools. And so, like, coaches who are in attendance, school admin, like whoever you are, uh, serving in a school district or the parent of a child, like these are the things you can be advocating for, right? So, to my two folks, let's first of all take a second and introduce ourselves. Again, for those of you who are just joining us, my name is Evan. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm the community and youth programming manager. I'm here all the time. I'm not the interesting one. So why don't we introduce ourselves in the order of folks on my screen? Finley, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Finley. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a university third year and I'm a volunteer. I facilitate the high school support group. And yeah, anything else you want us to share, Evan?
When did you come out, Finley?
I came out when I was 16.
Perfect. Thank you. I just think that provides a little bit of context. And that's going to be ironic, I think, maybe. Hold on. Elio, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Elio Garcia. I use he, they pronouns. I am one of the Latinx ambassadors for TransFamily Support Services, and I'm the Discord coordinator. I want to, first of all, apologize for every and all technical issues that may be happening with my audio and video. I am currently in a dorm room with lots of other kids, all using the same Wi-Fi. So I may be pausing and glitching. I also have a roommate who is actively here right now. So if you see movement in the background, don't worry, it's just her. I am currently a sophomore at University of San Francisco, my first year on campus, so technically a freshman. And I came out when I was 18, my senior year of high school.
Okay. So not ironic, Finley. I also came out at 16. And so I was like, if all of us came out at 16, like that's going to be pretty cool. Whatever. Elliot doesn't get to party with the cool kids. All right, so let's talk. And so both of you are in university, but you're younger than I am, and so you have a recent connection to high school. Finley, you were out in high school. Elio, I know a little bit about your story, and you were out for like the latter part of your high school year, but I understand things were like wacky with COVID. So just we're gonna start at like that high school level, and then we're gonna work our way up to maybe what are some of the better practices. Because I know once I got to college, our professors were a lot more informed in how to be trans affirming. And so there were some things that happened at the college level where I'm like, oh, this would be great to bring to my high school, right? So we'll start a little bit with that high school piece and just talking in general terms, what are some of the big indicators for you all when you're in high school, middle school, elementary school, whenever you're interacting with adults? What were those indicators that you would look for to show or to hint that somebody might be an ally?
I think for me, definitely, like, I think someone in the chat said, like, the having pride flags or pins. I know there's some teachers that display them in their windows, of their classrooms or like on their doors. And that's always really nice to see. Because I think it just sort of like makes it feel like the classroom's a safe space in itself. I think, teachers like showing that they care about social justice and care about their LGBT plus students. I think like I've had teachers before like share that that's something important to them, like the first day of class, just to kind of make their students aware of that. Um, and I even had a teacher like on the first day of class like share her personal experience of like diversity and with being raised by two moms, and so like trying to share that that's something that she brings into her classroom. um, and definitely just like I think actions speak louder than words a lot, like being there. Like if you see a student doing something to discriminate against a another student, especially for this specific like a trans student, I think making sure to stop that behavior and speak out against that behavior, because a lot of trans students feel like they're ignored or they can't go to a teacher for help because the teacher is not going to be there for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love both both like of the two big things of, you know, having some sort of visible indicator. And it was Laura in the comments who said something. And for those of you who tune into our live streams, Laura is frequently sharing her wisdom in the comments, and she is a phenomenal resource. She is our Latinx outreach coordinator with the organization. And so we're plugging her in here as well. Thank you, Laura, for always being at our live streams and supporting the organization. But yes, those visible symbols absolutely matter. And somebody else in the comments just said a rainbow pride sticker on a water bottle. I am definitely a huge proponent for something on your person or something that you can remove when you're not visible there. So like if you had a substitute teacher, then something like a little picture could be taken off your desk. Because for me, you know, in middle school, it kind of happened, but for the most part, at that college level, you're not always in the same classroom. And so you want to make sure that you're not just putting it on a door where potentially the adult in there isn't going to be affirming. So things, having them on your person, I really recommend. I love, you know, Laura and Finley both talked about things like pins or stickers. And then also this piece of, you know, being able to say something every time you hear something. And a lot of the times we get kind of frozen in our fear when it comes to affirming or shutting down some transphobic or some gender-based or LGBTQ-based harassment. And the reality is, especially in a school setting, it really is a simple thing of, we don't talk like that at school. That's not appropriate here. And you don't have to get all educator on it about like why we don't talk about that and why that's not okay to say. You really can just leave it at, we don't talk like that here. So Finley, I appreciate you bringing that up. Elia?
I personally am also a big fan of flagging, the visual showing of support, you know, whether that be a pin on a lanyard, a bracelet, or even like a bigger sign in your classroom. But I also think that showing diversity in places where diversity isn't centered is also a really good way to be an ally in the classroom. Things, for example, like when you make worksheets and instead of having, you know, every single image being a heterosexual couple, maybe make it a homosexual couple in the little corner as your graphic. In PowerPoints, even, you know, and symbols around the classroom. I think this would more specifically be for elementary school aged kids, but when you're learning things like shapes and colors and you have little figures of people showing you, I'm wearing an orange shirt, having the person be different races can show diversity in the racial aspect. So similarly, when you talk about, oh, you know, places, a family going to the supermarket, why not have it be a homosexual couple with a child going to the supermarket, or a trans couple going to the bank? So diversity doesn't have to be the center of the conversation, and I don't like using the word normalizing because trans and LGBTQ relationships and people are normal. But I guess destigmatizing diversity with children, where especially in those ages where it's a little bit more controversial that, oh, you're corrupting the kids. It's just showing that people are different.
Yeah, and I love that call out in particular for, and again, two things, like in particular for elementary schools, but also the fact that we don't have to be centering or explicitly talking about LGBTQ identities to be showing that it is a part of our world. I'm going to actually share my screen again really quickly, if Martine would be so kind. Blue's Clues is kind of paving the world with 2 times now. They have really brought out and represented this LGBTQ community. But this is just this is a screen grab from their alphabet song, and it's one letter. It's P is full of pride, right? And they have all of these flags represented, and it's a couple of seconds. But my goodness, those couple of seconds made me cry the first time I saw the video, because when else are we seeing, and like Elio said, when else are we seeing these identities normalized? So thank you, Martine. You can stop the screen share again now. And there are a lot of beautiful books out there for all learner levels, all reading levels, that are representative of LGBTQ identities, that explain these concepts in ways that is easy to understand for our youth, and it also makes it easiest for us to, as adults, to understand. If you've heard me ever talk about like LGBTQ picture books before, you've heard me mention Red, a Crayon Story. It is my favorite picture book to represent the trans experience. And it's done really subtly, it's done really well, and it's really easy to understand. So, like Elia said, we don't have to be talking explicitly about, you know, LGBTQ identities when we pull out these books or when we put these symbols up, but they're there. And if kiddos ask questions about them, we're able to answer those questions in an open and non-judgmental way. And that really does make a difference. Thank you. And I see we, Martine put our LGBTQ youth standards of care link on our, where it is on our website in the comments. So please check that out if you are an educator, or even if you're a parent and you're looking to get a little bit more information about how you can support your own youth, or you can support your youth's friends, because my goodness, there are plenty of LGBTQ youth coming out right now. So chances are you are interacting with them. So Finley and Elio, another question. So I guess Finley, more directed towards you. You were out while you were in high school in person, whereas Elio, I'm so sorry, you had a weird experience, and that we could talk about that too if you have anything to input. But you know, Finley, what were the reactions like, and what were the things that went well when you came out to your teachers, as opposed to what were the things where you were like, this could be improved upon?
Yeah, I think it was very mixed bag. I had the first person I came out to was actually one of my teachers, my sign language teacher, who was really great. The same teacher that made it very clear that she was supportive. And she was definitely the teacher that all the queer kids kind of came to. And her classroom was very clearly a safe space. And so that was a really awesome thing. I also had a great time in theater. That was a really supportive environment. At the time when I came out, I was in JROTC, which are, for those who are not familiar, it's like, you know, Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps. It's like, it's in a lot of high schools, I would say. So I feel like most people probably are aware of it. But I guess you'd be surprised, but that was not a very welcoming environment. And I eventually actually left the program just because of the reactions from students and the instructors. It was just, you know, not very open to, like, I think I asked for a male uniform rather than a female uniform, and they refused, and it was just not a very good experience. And nothing was said directly to my face, but I heard from friends that the teacher started saying like transphobic things in class after I left. So it was really disheartening, because I think I felt really close to this organization, and then like they just kind of kicked me to the curb. But I found a really great home in theater and was completely supported there and like allowed to play male roles, and it was really great. And I found a new community. A lot of teachers, I think, just weren't malicious, but just uneducated and weren't really aware of how to support trans students. I remember that my junior year was like the first time my school was trying to do inclusive sex education for LGBT plus students. And a lot of the lessons were just, they were good, but the teacher clearly didn't know what they were talking about, and weren't able to answer students' questions. They couldn't even pronounce the word cisgender. And so it was just clear that the materials were given to the teacher without the teacher understanding them. And it just sort of turned into an opportunity for the straight and cisgender students to kind of poke fun at the queer students in the class. And you know, I had a teacher hold me after class once to like say, I don't know what you are, and try to interrogate me about my gender, which is just, it's sort of challenging. I think a lot of teachers want to understand, and they don't understand, and they want to like ask questions, but a lot of times that can be really uncomfortable for a student who feels like their gender is being questioned or being interrogated. And just like a lot of students don't like being singled out from the class for that specific thing, especially because a lot of trans students experience a lot of bullying from other students. But yeah, so overall, I'd say it was like a mixed bag. There were some teachers that were really amazing, and some teachers that really weren't. But I'm hoping that since the 3 years I've been in high school, it's gotten a little bit better.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing up that piece of, in particular, like showing LGBT inclusive like sex ed in classes. Part of the work that we do, and before the pandemic, and I'm hoping that now that, you know, schools are starting to be in person again, we'll be invited back. But part of the work that we were doing with one of our school districts that we partner with is we were going in and we were essentially supplementing the given LGBT curriculum for their health class. And the teacher did share, you know, what the curriculum is in the actual manual, and it's it's not reflective of what our youth are experiencing. And it's this piece of, you know, they're throwing in outdated terminology, or teachers aren't being, you know, taught the correct pronunciation of certain words, and that really does become a barrier for our students who are LGBTQ to feel safe disclosing their own experiences in those environments where it could add to the conversation. And also for our ally students to step up and be allies, because it's harder for our students to then take things seriously when it's clear that the teacher isn't prepared to teach that. And that's nothing against teachers, because, you know, when you're going in to teach subject matters, we know that this material is changing all the time, and our teachers have to actively seek out resources in order to teach the most updated forms of, like, I learned recently that like science has changed since I went to high school, and like they don't teach the same model of an atom, and I got very upset about it. But a teacher had to relearn what they already knew in order to continue to teach their students. And unfortunately, a lot of school districts and a lot of written curriculum for schools is not being written in a way which is going to heighten the knowledge of our students and increase good representation of the LGBTQ community. And so I encourage our teachers who are teaching these health classes, or who do bring up explicitly like LGBTQ history or LGBTQ figures in their curriculum, which is super important that we do, that you reach out to local LGBTQ serving organizations, or your school's GSA, or your school's GSA advisor, and they can reach out to particular kiddos within the GSA who might be interested in helping you develop a more apt curriculum. It's definitely a piece of, it's an extra step, and it's some added work that we may have to do as the adults in a room. It's definitely worth it though when we see how much it impacts these youth. So I don't know, Elio, if you had anything you wanted to say about, you know, what were some of the positives and some of the negatives, maybe even in the college world, that you've experienced around identifying as LGBTQ, but this would definitely be a space for that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, while we're still on the topic of curriculum and specifically sex ed and health education, I took in high school health over the summer online because I was in band, and so I needed room in my schedule to do band. But I don't remember a single thing about LGBTQ relationships ever being mentioned, and it makes me think about what sexual health and health classes that are now digital because of COVID look like, because the curriculum was very condensed because it was over the summer anyway, let alone trying to translate a whole health class into completely virtual for the pandemic. But that was something that I instantly thought of. And then another thing I wanted to talk about, unless Evan has something to say.
I would say, can I actually interrupt you on the health ed for a bit? And I think this is a big part where we're talking about like healthy relationships and sex ed for our LGB students, right? Like a lot of this conversation, because of the work that our organization does, obviously we're centering trans voices, but that LGBT piece is also really significant, talking about healthy relationships, healthy sex. September is Sexual Health Awareness Month, and so this is absolutely an appropriate time to be really talking about these conversations. They just are starting to do human trials for a cure for AIDS, and that is absolutely something you could be bringing up in your biology classes, talking about epidemiology and how vaccines are progressed. And this is one of those pieces where you can casually bring up a major historical event that represents or impacts the LGBTQ community without making it an LGBTQ topic. So I just wanted to interrupt and say that really quickly, but Elio, please continue. And thank you for letting me interrupt.
Yeah, absolutely. And then going kind of off of that, like the historical aspect of learning about LGBTQ people, in a lot of schools in the United States, as some of you know, when you take history, you learn pretty much the basics of everything. So you never really learn in depth of anything. I mean, you kind of learn about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, and if you're lucky, Malcolm X during the Civil Rights Movement. But typically in the United States classroom, specifically in high school, you're not learning about Stonewall. You're not learning about anything historical that when it comes to LGBTQ people and the LGBTQ community. At least I didn't. And I went to high school in California, supposedly one of the more progressive states in the United States. And so along with supplementing instruction for sexual health, I think history teachers and supplementing instruction for history, it doesn't necessarily have to be a whole unit, unit 5, the gays or anything. It can just be, historically, while all of this was happening, there was also these movements in the LGBTQ community, and these problems that they were fighting still affect members of this community today, because that is relevant in history. And then now I'd like to talk a little bit about what it was like being virtual in high school, newly coming out. So we all kind of know with Zoom, you're able to edit your name, which I think is a great way for trans people in particular to feel affirmed. I know a lot of teachers had issues with students having cameras off, and that can be distressing because, visual dysphoria, not really wanting to look at yourself in the mirror at home, let alone stare at yourself for an hour on Zoom where your camera is probably even mirrored, so you look weird. Anyway, and so pros and cons. One thing I did kind of want to mention is pretty early on, when Zoom started picking up as the major way for schools to host online classes, we saw the wide range of emojis and skin color of, having a light thumbs up to a darker thumbs up. But it wasn't until Pride Month 2021 that we started getting rainbow borders for your video or rainbow backgrounds. And so I think it was interesting that that wasn't deemed necessary until it's the month of celebrating the LGBTQ community. And so I think that along with making sure that things are accessible for people of all skin colors, making sure that if an LGBTQ student wanted to have like a rainbow border, or even a teacher wanted to have a rainbow border on their Zoom video as a way to show allyship, that that's accessible and not just in months where we're supposedly celebrated.
Yeah, and the Zoom piece, it definitely brings in a couple of different things for me. And I remember when our schools first switched to being virtual, I know that a lot of our youth who were still in high school, middle school, not so much, again, I don't work so much with our elementary schoolers. It's more of a parent involvement thing. And so our parent coordinators work with them. But for my kiddos who I was working with, a lot of schools had actually barred the function to change your name as it appears in Zoom, because they were trying to prevent kiddos from abusing that power. But I want to say, when we do things like that, we are limiting accessibility to our trans students. And Elliot talks about things like visual or verbal dysphoria or vocal dysphoria. And so not wanting to look at yourself, not wanting to turn your mic on. And instead, a lot of our trans youth may opt to type and have their cameras off, and making sure that that's an option for them in your classrooms, but also being mindful that things like, their student account name may have the first initial of their dead name. And so now they're going to get questions when they're using their school email, and that's the display that pops up. So making sure that your students are able to change their names and put their pronouns in on Zoom. I had a professor who, before our first day of class, and I know a lot of schools have come back into starting, but it's never too late, right? I had a professor who, before our first day of class, she sent out an email. If you can make sure when you log in that your Zoom name is your first and last name, and if you're comfortable, your pronouns. And making that the standard that you are establishing with your students before they even meet you is going to deeply impact how your trans youth interact with that space. And they're going to know that even if they're not comfortable putting their pronouns in their display name that first class setting, because they want to see which of their peers are doing it, they want to see if anyone makes fun of it. We see a lot of, back when I was in high school, it was the, well, I identify as an attack helicopter, and now it's like the satire around using your pronouns and displaying your pronouns. And we're really seeing this on platforms like Instagram, which has now made it accessible to put your pronouns in displays, and folks are taking that as an opportunity to kind of mock folks who are trying to be allies to this community. So while your kiddos, back to my point, while your kiddos may not feel comfortable putting their pronouns in, when they see that this is something that you are doing or something that you are advocating for, they're going to know that if they have issues at home or on campus or with another teacher, that at least there is that one, again, affirming adult. And we see with statistics how much that can impact wellness throughout a person's lifetime. And so before I ask my next question, I feel like my headphones keep falling out of my ears, so I'm sorry that I keep messing with those. But before I ask my next question, I just wanted to plug again our services. Trans Family Support Services is a trans serving organization, but we also, when we do these educational topics, when we talk about how schools can better support our trans students, we do talk about our LGBTQ students in general, because we know that our trans students may have some fluid identities where they may identify as like LGB before they identify as T. We know that we have students who are going to have trans parents. We know that we have students who are going to have same-sex parents. And so when we're having these conversations, we would be doing a disservice to the small part of the population that we serve to not be educating on the greater population. So if you are working in a school district, if you're a teacher, if you work at the district office, if you are an administrator, if you are the students, the campus supervisor at your school, please be advocating for us to come in and do some education, or for someone to be doing this education with your school. We are willing to alter our statistics and our slides and everything to fit whatever state you're in. If you're not in the state of California, we're super prepared for California. We have a branch location in Huntsville, Alabama. So we are in those states where it might be a little bit trickier. We've had these conversations in the Alabama school districts that we have access to. So please send us an email, reach out to us. You can reach out to me directly as our youth programs coordinator. We have a ton of services that are accessible to our youth. And we really want to make sure that not just the educational piece, but also the rest of our services are being pushed out to these populations. And all of our services that work directly with trans clients and their families are free. So there are no fees to those services, to things like our support groups, our youth programming. We do support for entire families. So just being willing to put our name out there. We have, I just found out we're getting stickers. I don't know if we officially have our stickers yet or not, but we're getting them. And so if you see us at tabling events and you want to grab a sticker and put that on your water bottle, like Laura said, that would be a fantastic opportunity. And I see Martine is putting my contact information in the chat. Yes, please feel free to reach out to me. Okay. So it sounds like, and I'm talking behind the scenes with some folks, we may be wrapping this event up a little bit early. I know we're scheduled to be here until 6:30, but like I said, a couple of my panelists, I think, got caught up with school stuff or club stuff, whatever. High schoolers, and I love them. And I've worked with them for 5 years, so I'm not surprised that, every once in a while in this back to school time period, what I used to do is I'd get home from school and I would take a nap. And so I bet one of these kiddos fell asleep and did not set an alarm, and they're just living their best life, and they deserve that sleep. Lord knows that our kids are not sleeping enough. So I think what's going to be my last question, unless we have any questions pop up in the comments on any of our platforms that folks are streaming this from, I do want to ask Elio and Finley, what is something that you would say to the teachers out there who want to support these youth, who want to affirm these youth, but maybe aren't sure how to start? And either of you could go first. Yeah.
I think a lot can be done in terms of like just asking students what they need. Some students aren't comfortable communicating that, but some students can be pretty outspoken. Um, like asking a student what pronouns they would like you to use, or asking a student if there's a different name. I think, like you brought up, Evan, a teacher actually came up to you and asked, how you would like to be referred. And that can mean a lot for a student, that someone saw them and someone, thought that they might need help, or thought that they might, want to be called something different. I definitely think educating yourself too, we're all, constantly educating ourselves. And I think like trying to be aware of these topics, if you're, like Elio mentioned, if you're a history teacher, knowing about LGBT plus history and teaching it in your classroom can be a great way to start a conversation, because maybe you have a lesson and then, a student feels like, oh, they're educated about this, I might be able to talk to them. I think that, and I just wanted to also bring up in the chat, I saw something about someone being fearful for their child after hearing about some things I experienced. And I just want to say that parents can do a lot to help a kid, and a angry parent on the phone can, make things, can move some things. So, if you hear about, make sure that you check in with your kid a lot and see how they're doing. And if they communicate that they're having issues with teachers or staff, you can get on the phone and do something about that. And also, TransFamily Support Services has a lot of great resources to help if a school isn't affirming.
Absolutely. And to that like piece with history teachers in particular, and I just want to put out, this call out for our teachers. If you have another opportunity where one of my teachers really stood above and beyond, and obviously like they really touched me with this because I'm still thinking about it and I'm a grown adult. There's no reason for me to be dwelling on high school anymore. But if you have gender segregated activities or sex segregated activities, I had a history teacher who wanted to do a mock debate, boys versus girls, who this was after I'd come out to him. And so like a week in advance, he pulled me aside discreetly and was like, hey, Evan, we're going to be doing this activity next week. Do you want to sit with the girls? Do you want to sit with the boys? Do you want to moderate the debate? Do you want to just go to a different classroom for that activity and just like not be here during it? Like, what is going to make you most comfortable? So being able to have those individualized conversations, because what was going to work for me wasn't going to work for, the next trans student or the next non-binary student who was going to walk in that door. So being able to personalize those conversations. And Elio.
I would say that if you're a teacher and you want to be more affirming to your kids, but you don't really know where to start with the small things. Don't start with the big things, because that can often be very overwhelming. Trying to plan a whole lesson can be a lot, but doing something small, like maybe getting a little flag and having it in the cup where you keep your pens, making an effort to be inclusive with the graphics you use for presentations, and even something as simple as your worksheets having a space for name on roster or in preferred name, can be really big things for a transgender student who doesn't quite feel like they want to out themselves or share. It can be a way for them to know that at least they have one teacher that's safe.
Absolutely. And I will say, for those of you who are teachers who use Canva, I know that I had an internship at a high school last year for my social work program, and we used Canva a lot for making worksheets. Canva has some wonderful graphics that show, same-sex couples. They have a ton of different pride flag graphics. It's a really easy way to show some representation, and it's a super easy service to use. So I like it for PowerPoints. I like it for making flyers and worksheets. And it's doing, a pretty good job of being representative. So being able to be very intentional with what you're selecting, being intentional with what books you are putting on like your, to be read. I had a teacher who like would have what she was currently reading on her whiteboard, and just like on her little marker tray would be, this is what I'm reading. And it would be a book. Being intentional with what that is reflecting, and not just our LGBTQ students, but like Elio, brought up earlier with Zoom and having the different colored hand reactions and hand symbols, being able to show, anti-racist, feminist texts, other texts that are representative of all of our marginalized identities that our students are experiencing, because we know that these kiddos are vulnerable and that they do need our support. So thank you both for sharing time with me. What I would say, and someone actually said in the comments, we need more teachers like the teacher I was speaking of when I shared about my history teacher. And what I would say is I got incredibly lucky, because I had some really, really positive experiences in high school, and I had some really not so experiences. And it is very much a piece of, as a trans person, we are so frequently told, or looked at with pity and sympathy for our LGBTQ identities. And I want all of our allies, especially watching, but all of our youth who may have tuned in, to know that this is something to celebrate and this is something to be proud of. And our teachers and how the adults in our lives react to this knowledge and celebrate this knowledge with us can have a huge impact. I only just changed my name just this last November. And so I reached out to a couple of the teachers that I had, had when I was back in high school, and I had long graduated from them. And I was like, hey, this is my name now. And they were excited for me. And so sharing in that excitement and sharing in that joy, if a student, is disclosing these milestones to you, if a student starts their medical transition while they're in your classroom and you have a good relationship and they want to tell you like, hey, is my voice deeper? Have you noticed? Or like, hey, like, is my skin clearer? I started estrogen. They want you to celebrate those successes with them, because that is going to mean so much more than talking about like the hard and heavy stuff. So allyship is celebration. Allyship is joy. Like Elia said, it's starting with the small things, and learning who in your colleagues and who at your district are going to support you as you continue to support these youth. We know that there are tons of LGBTQ youth who are, in our schools right now, but we also know there are tons of LGBTQ teachers and administrators and other folks working in our schools. And we just gotta create that one safe space where they also feel safe to disclose their identity, so that we can build up a connection, so that we can better support our youth in the greater scheme of things. So that is kind of what we have for this time slot. Those are my questions that I had prepared. I do want to say next week we are going to be doing a similar panel. It is going to have a couple of more folks, maybe some of the folks who might be sleeping through this one. But it's going to be directed more towards our parents and students. It's going to be more of a know your rights sort of conversation. So teachers, if you want to tune into that one as well, we are going to be talking about some of those more legislative pieces. We're going to be bringing up some stuff from the National Center for Trans Equality and from GLSEN, which are both national organizations. Except as soon as I go to close, we do have a question. So Linda asks, do you feel that the atmosphere now is more supportive than in the past, say within the last 5 to 10 years? That's a really good question. And I think we have a good set of ages. I think we're all about like 2 years apart from one another. Yeah, it's me, and then 2 years in Finley, and then 2 years Elio. So we kind of show that good diversity. And so what I will say on a selfish and narcissistic note, we were seeing a lot of progress towards support and inclusivity my senior year. In the district that I was in when I was in high school, we saw kind of a big lawsuit, a couple of lawsuits throughout the country around trans access to restrooms. Our school campus got gender neutral restrooms, although I think there are kind of waves of when those get appropriately utilized and when schools maybe don't want to think too hard about, what monitoring those spaces looks like. So I think when I was in high school, when it was my senior year, we had a lot of movements towards supporting and affirming these communities, with the caveat that I graduated in 2016. And we know that in 2016, things took a pretty steep downwards turn when it comes to LGBT inclusion and representation. So from what I'm hearing from my youth and what I'm hearing from my kiddos now, we are coming back up towards growth and progress. But I would say that it's not really a linear model, and it's very hilly. There's ups and downs to it. And that is my opinion. So Finley or Elio, if you want to speak on it a little bit.
Yeah, I came out in 2016, which was a pretty chaotic time to come out. I also was planning on enlisting in the military after high school, so that changed clearly. But I think that was I definitely saw some backsliding. It was a time when I saw definitely like homophobia and transphobia from teachers who had not expressed it before that I think felt a new comfort doing it with the new administration that was elected in 2016. But I've definitely seen some signs of improvement as things have changed. I think like politics matter, and when who's in charge matters, even if it's like just at a very local level. And I think that definitely being aware of if you're in a place where new legislation that is anti-trans or anti-LGBT plus has been introduced, that can increase the difficulty that students have, because for one, they may be thinking about that legislation and their rights, and that may be affecting them personally, but also other students may be aware of that and teachers may be aware of that, and that may change how comfortable people feel expressing their negative views towards LGBT plus students. So I definitely think, like Evan says, it changes. But I do think we're seeing some improvement now in some areas. But there are, of course, places all over the country where we're seeing anti-trans legislation, especially in terms of sports.
Elio, if you wanted to go next, for those of you who just saw Martine hop in, Martine actually has things that they want to say about this too. So I'm going to give Elio space, and then we'll hear from Martine as well.
I would say that it definitely depends where geographically you're located. I'm in Northern California right now, and I would say that support for LGBTQ has not really wavered up here, even in the past 5 years that we had, where the administration, the federal government was not super supportive of the LGBTQ community. That being said, where I used to live did have that sort of dip in support, even with, the inclusion of the gender neutral bathrooms. Full disclosure, Evan and I did go to the same high school in the same district. So I actually went to school with the gender neutral restrooms, and they were only open my senior year because of the faculty's fear about how those spaces would be monitored and those spaces being used inappropriately. And so I would say that it definitely depends where you are. Some places, have pretty unwavering support. Other places, we see a lot of fluctuation and even now some pushback.
And Martine, we were talking in the chat, for those of you in the comments, about the different time frames in which all of us came out. And so Martine thought that they would also have something poignant to say. So I hope your mouth is no longer full of food. But yeah, share your words, share your wisdom.
So, hello everyone. So I'm not on camera. I apologize. I'm in the middle of eating. So I was supposed to be tech on this. But I wanted to add my 2 cents, my 3 cents, so to speak, because, I, out of everyone here, is the only individual who came out over a decade ago. And so asking a question that spans back that far, I would like to just say that I think that things have been more supportive and progressive in the right direction. But I think that we forget that there is the T and the TGNC part of our community as far as the larger LGB and LGBTQ, right? And so within that, I think that we can acknowledge that there have been strides made to be progressive towards understanding and supporting same-sex relationships. But I think that there are many more strides and things that we can do to create safe spaces and understanding and points of acknowledgement and knowledge for those in the TGNC community. And I just think that, I always tell this story about, graduating from high school. I actually didn't graduate. I dropped out of high school when I was a junior. And the reason why that was is essentially that I was trash canned on the last day leaving high school. And, that was a direct relation to, being a very openly queer individual, being very flamboyant, one might say. But, I saw it as just being myself. And that had a lot to do with my gender expression at a young age. Everyone talking about graduating in 2016 is making me feel a little uncomfortable because, you're making me remember that I graduated in 2010, technically, even though I didn't graduate. And so, it is very interesting to think that, in that time frame, there has been a lot of progression. It's also wild for me to think that, a majority of those on this call right now graduated, like you all pointed out, when there was a huge political shift in which people's rights on a social level were, being affected, as well as we're in a context of speaking in schools, people were having their rights ripped away with access to stuff. And on the point of, gender neutral restrooms, it was made aware to me, it may have been by you, Elio, that, those aren't everywhere on campuses. In fact, they're usually not in convenient locations. And so even in that, there's more progress that can be made. So I would just wanted to add those 3 cents. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for that, Martine, because I think it is important to acknowledge the growth, and then, like Finley mentioned as well, the impact of politics and how politics play. And what I will say is, we are in an exciting time where our current administration, the White House, form to contact them. There's now a space to select your pronouns. And that is the sort of thing which is going to gently shape a more affirming world. And so, I'm reading comments. Give me a second. Yeah. So I do want to say, I want to plug one more time. For those of you who are working in schools and are looking for ways to be allies, checking again the youth standards of care that TransFamily helped to write alongside a couple of other youth serving orgs in the San Diego and California area, as well as Welcoming Schools has a checklist for creating a welcoming and inclusive school environment. And you can find that on their website. There are a lot of resources that exist out there. Check out if you are out of state. I see that there's someone who's joining us from Michigan. If you are in a state that is not California, there are tons of LGBT serving orgs in your area. Check out the nearest center, see what outreach they're doing with schools in your area, and see if you can bring them into your schools, because chances are, I actually acknowledged this with my sister the other day. My sister also identifies as a part of the LGBTQ community. When we were in high school, we had never seen like a 20 to 30-year-old LGBTQ person. All of the LGBTQ person or people that we knew were either our age or they were our elders. They were people who like my parents had grown up with. And so it's really important that we're able to see healthy and happy young adult professionals who identify similarly to us. I feel incredibly lucky that I'm able to go back to my old school district and my old high school and say, hi, I literally made this thing my job, and my identity is respected in my professional world, and it's respected by my boss and my coworkers. It was respected by my professors in college, and it does get better, right? And it's such a cheesy thing to say. It does get better, but it really does. And I think Finley and Elio and Martine can all attest to that as well. So again, I'm not going to apologize. I'm giving you all an extra half hour to your evening that you may have anticipated sitting here for, really an extra 25 minutes, because we did, linger for a little bit. Thank you so much for sharing your space with us this evening, for taking a little bit of time to share your stories with us, Finley and Elio and Martine. Like I said, I'm always super happy to work with educators. I love working with these youth. I changed my whole college education to continue working with these youth, so clearly I feel some sort of way about it. And know that we are a resource. Wherever you are in this country, TransFamily is willing to help connect you to resources if we cannot be that resource itself, or we're very willing to look deeply into state legislation so that we can best support you and your youth as well. There are lots of resources out there. One other thing that I do want to mention really quickly is there are lots of affirming organizations that have policies that are explicitly affirming of LGBTQ identities. And these are nationwide organizations like the California Association of School Social Workers, the PTA, not California Association of School Social Workers. That's the chapter that I'm a part of. The Association of School Social Workers, the PTA has a policy that is affirming of LGBTQ identities. It's important that we know that these institutions are explicitly going out of their way to support these communities, because that is what's going to support us in turn when we go to our school board or when we go to our school district and we say, hey, We need to be teaching LGBT inclusive history. We need to be teaching LGBT inclusive sex ed. We need to change our definition of this. I mean, when I was taught sex ed in high school, and again, I graduated just in 2016, we were still being shown a documentary that taught that AIDS was gay cancer. So we need to be improving our curriculum, and these are the organizations, these are the institutions who are going to support us in doing that. And TransFamily is absolutely here to support you in supporting our youth. So again, thank you all for your time. Thank you all for your evening. I am always accessible offline. You can send me an email. I typically respond within a week because kids take up my life and they're my priority. And so emails can wait because my kids don't email, they text me. But please feel free to reach out to either info@transfamilysos.org or directly to me, evan@transfamilysos.org. We are here to support you in whatever that looks like. If it is a one-on-one conversation with you directly about how you can make your classroom a more inclusive space, we're happy to do that. If it is a meeting with your school's principal and figuring out how we can get our training on your school campus, we want to do that as well. However we can support you, we are here for you, and we're here for your students. So thank you all for your evening. Welcome to September. Oh my goodness. Can you believe it's already September? Thanksgiving break is almost around the corner. I am going to see all my friends and eat so much good food, and I can't believe it's fall. I hope those of you in the southeastern United States are staying safe with Hurricane Ida. My goodness. I know our Huntsville, Alabama folks are kind of struggling through it. So best of luck to you. Please stay safe. Please take care of those that you love. And finally, know how valued you are, and know that we appreciate you all in being here. So have a great rest of your evening. Have a lovely extra 20 minutes that you may not have thought you were going to get. If you stepped away from your computer, you're going to stare at a blank screen for a while. We love you. We appreciate you for joining us. And hopefully we will see you again soon. All right. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you, folks, for joining us, Finley and Elio and Martine. I appreciated having your support during this conversation.